So let me start off and say, my husband and I are total stoners. So maybe that's the explanation for this. But I really think it was something supernatural. So I used to bartend and get home after midnight, and my husband now, boyfriend then, would stay up late, get high, and chill out and watch TV. So one night after work, we're doing our thing when it sounds like right outside our window, a car crash happens, preceded by screaming and general carrying on. We look outside and don't see anything at all. I figure maybe it's just out of view. Then, off and on, we kept hearing female and male screams, to the point where I'm like, do we need to call the cops? Like, it sounded terrifying, and sounded like it was happening right outside our window, but still, we couldn't see anything. I'm pretty shaken up, and I keep hearing it, but seriously, nothing. Eventually, it all calms down, and then we start getting a knock at the front door and the window, but no one there. At this point, I'm like, what the fuck? But I'm really thinking something not normal and natural is going on, but I don't want to indulge it. I get up to make some tea to calm us down when I hear a female's voice clear as day, as if it's in the same room, say, hello? I look out the kitchen to my husband and I'm like, did you hear that? He says yes, and all that I could do was walk around the room saying, what the fuck is going on? Like I was seriously tripping out. The next day, I asked my husband what was going on and he's like, I think it was some cats on the porch. Lol. My husband is a total skeptic, but every now and then I'll bring it up. And one time he did admit that it was something strange, and he did hear it. But most times he just wants to act like it was nothing. Ever since I can remember, I felt something with me. Ghost or not, it doesn't scare me, but it likes to play jokes. One of the instances that stands out was about 10 years ago. I was still living with my parents at the time, and I decided to cook dinner. I love to cook, so it was never a chore, but I hate peeling potatoes. My dad has never minded peeling them for me, so we went to the kitchen together to prepare the dinner. Our kitchen bar was L-shaped, and the little part of the L was always clear except when we were preparing food. My dad and I started getting everything out of the cabinets that we would need. He then asked me if I had seen any of the potato peelers. I told him no, but I'd help him look. My mother is just like me in the fact that everything has a place, so I thought this task would be simple. Both my father and I looked in the drawer where they usually are, then the dishwasher, then the dish strainer. We were beginning to get frustrated. We started looking in cabinets and other places that we knew they weren't supposed to be, but it was worth a shot. While my dad was at the other end of the kitchen, I bent down to look in the cabinets under the small part of the L, and my dad called my name. I stood up and looked at him with my back toward the bar. He had a blank stare on his face and was just pointing. I turned to see what he was pointing at, and on the edge of the bar, 2 of the potato peelers were neatly placed side by side. A more recent event happened a couple of weeks ago. A little bit of a side note, my husband absolutely hates to misplace or lose things. One morning we had gotten up, made our bed, and went to the kitchen for breakfast. On top of our freshly made bed, my husband placed his wallet to come back for later. After breakfast, he said he needed to go to the store and proceeded to our bedroom while I stayed in the kitchen cleaning up. All of a sudden I heard, "You've got to be kidding me." I smiled because I knew what had happened. He came back to the kitchen and asked if any of our children had been in the bedroom. I replied that they had gotten out of bed and been in the kitchen the entire time. After 10 years of being with me, the last thing he thinks of is my friend, as he calls it, hiding things. I told him I'd go help him look, so we headed back to the room to look. We looked under the bed, on our dressers, in the bathroom, and then slowly took off every layer of the bed. At the end of the search, still no wallet, and the cover and sheets lay in a big pile at the end of the bed. Being the OCD man he is and hating that something of his had disappeared, he tried to convince me and himself that maybe he sat it in the living room or kitchen. To humour him, I followed him through the house, searching room by room, even the rooms we both knew he didn't go in. By this time he was angry. I told him it would turn up and that I was going to make the bed again. As soon as I stepped in the door, I called for him to come. Lying on top of the mound of covers lay his wallet. He doesn't like my friend. When I was 22 years old, I was pregnant with my oldest child. My child's father, we'll call him Rob, had used illicit drugs in the past before we got together. Our bedroom was set up with our dresser placed against the wall opposite from our bed. One night, I awoke to the sound of scratching. I looked to the foot of the bed and saw the outline of Rob's body sitting there facing the dresser. He was leaning forward a bit, as if he were hovering over something on top of the dresser. I thought he was cutting up drugs, even though he had never done so during the 4 years we'd been together. Extremely confused, I whispered, "Rob, what are you doing?" He didn't acknowledge that he had heard me, so with a little more volume in my voice, I repeated his name. Again, no response. He just continued scratching at the dresser. Irritated, I threw the blanket off of myself, huffed loudly, and began to scoot down to the edge of the bed. But I stopped abruptly and froze. Before I had the chance to make any significant movement, I heard a sudden snort. You know the sound that people make when they snore and you interrupt their sleep, but they don't fully wake up. I slowly looked to my left and realized that Rob had been sleeping soundly next to me the entire time. So the summer before I started 6th grade, I had just moved into this new house and I was just done taking a shower. When I had walked out, I saw someone standing in the doorway of my brother's room. I thought it was my brother, since it looks like him. He said, "Hello there," in this creepy voice, and I just responded with a confused hi and left. I turned around to see if he was still there, and the bathroom door had shut. I went downstairs, talked to my mom a bit, then I threw my clothes in the laundry when I got down to the basement. Guess who was there? My brother and my stepdad. Both of them in the freezer looking for hot dogs. My brother had been downstairs the entire time and hadn't once gone upstairs. I just looked at them confused and shrugged it off, but I couldn't explain it. A few nights afterwards, I was laying in bed around my bedtime, and it was dark outside. I looked out my doorway to see a man in a hat and suit staring at me before turning around and going to my parents' room. I froze and felt extremely afraid. I eventually fell asleep though. For a little while, my mother said I would scream "shut up" and "get out" in my sleep, and she felt it was strange. I had no memories of it, or being distressed over a dream. Well, around that, I've never been afraid of the dark or felt uneasy about it. I've never been afraid of anything being under my bed or in my closet. I started to feel tense walking around the house when it was dark. Not always, but sometimes. Something in the body would tell me to run. I also felt cold breaths on me while I laid in bed or something grabbing me when I started to fall asleep. I would feel nervous laying up against my bed at night on the floor. And I would always constantly wake up every night at exactly 3:05 a.m. or 2:58 a.m., no other times. I started to close my closet door because I started to feel afraid, or like I was being watched when it was open. Fast forward a few years, and I just have the uneasiness, and my mom has cleansed the house with sage weekly. Well, we lost the sage. Every time we got sage, it would come up missing immediately. We could have just lost it, but still, we have no idea where most of it was. I started to have really bad sleep paralysis of the same skinny, ghostly women entering my room through my closet or from the bathroom. My mom cleansed my room again, and the most I've had recently was an uneasiness and nightmares of being killed by an entity. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not really afraid anymore, but it's still a strange occurrence. There was a period in my life where I would always wake up in the middle of the night. The TV was on eco mode, so it always shut off after inactivity. So the room would be pitch black when I woke up. Then, every time I woke up, I kept seeing this grey shadow standing in the middle of my room, facing me. It had no face and was maybe 1 meter 40 centimeters tall. Not very tall. It had the shape of a human. I remember every time this happened. I tried closing my eyes while I kept my cool, trying to turn the TV on. And as soon as the TV came on, it would disappear because of the light. This happened very frequently, so I got used to it and thought it was just something weird with my vision. But one night I woke up with the same shit happening, and I got fed up and decided to aggressively stand up and lean towards it while saying, "What the fuck are you?" to see what the fuck it was. Maybe scare it and make it disappear. What shocked me was it didn't disappear at all. It was still standing there, clear as day, facing me. I just ran the fuck up to turn the lights on, and it would disappear. And I would just sit in my room with the lights on for a bit, trying to make sense of what just happened. Strangest experience I've ever had with something paranormal. The shadow never appeared like this after this incident. In the corner of my room, I've got my TV and a sofa chair with my computer. And I've experienced 3 times when sitting and chilling on my computer with my TV off. I've seen in my TV a shadow walking past me, behind me. I grew up in rural North Carolina. I lived up in the woods where there used to be a water mill. A family lived there back in the 40s. The parents had 2 daughters and 1 son. Unfortunately, one of the daughters got caught under the water wheel and drowned. Ever since I've been a kid, I always heard humming and low singing in the woods when I was out tromping them. But the one thing that really scared me one night was when I was older. I worked for the sheriff's office, and I had left work early one night due to being over a lot of hours. So I got home around 2:30ish. And when I pulled up, I saw the figure of a little girl standing right beside my garage. And when I got out of my car, she was gone. The next experience I had was when I was out hunting in the same woods. It was super quiet, a beautiful fall evening. I had just got down into my stand when all of a sudden I started hearing the same humming and singing I heard multiple times over the years. But I heard what sounded like someone walking towards me. I looked everywhere and couldn't see anything. And I heard a laugh, but not the same laugh as before. So as I was climbing down my tree stand, a rock hit my boot. And once again, I heard the laughing. Now, mind you, the area I was hunting was about 3 miles deep in the woods, where there was no one around. So I brought my brother and cousin and a few friends down there one night, and we were just going to sit and listen and see if we could hear anything, or whatever. We were down there playing cards, joking about it, when all of us heard what sounded like someone that was in the distress. We all went quiet and listened, and we could hear what sounded like someone breathing heavily. And the thing that confused me about that night was that if it was a little girl or something more dark, sometimes I think things are better left alone. I can't say that I've never seen a ghost, but two experiences tell me I might have been near one. The first one, I was recruiting duty in New Jersey, Army. My wife and I lived on Fort Dix. FYI, it was the early 2000s, and while Fort Dix is not an active duty post anymore, the housing area and facilities are still used for personnel that have to work in the area. Or were. I have no idea of their status now. The thing is, the housing area was supposed to be torn down and new houses built. They had actually torn down a section and were going to build new houses. Then, me and other service members would move from our homes to the new ones, and the houses we left would be torn down and replaced. That didn't happen, because this was shortly after 9/11. All of those houses were the same, as you'd expect on a military post. Same layout, same basic stuff. We lived right next to a guy I worked with. Hell, two other guys I worked with lived on the same streets. We all got along, but as you can imagine, even though I liked these guys, seeing them 12 plus hours at work and then after work and on days off got old, fast. Then there was a hurricane that passed through. Fort Dix is relatively close to the coast, so there was a lot of rain. And since the army has taken money out of maintaining the housing areas so they could build a fence around the entire post, the roof of our house collapsed. I'll spare you the details. Basically, we had to move. The government was at fault, blah, blah, blah. There were two houses that were available at the time. Yeah, I could have taken the option to move off post, but recruiting duty was brutal. I was at work all of the time, and my wife was already pissed about that. I was never home, and I only had Sundays off, and sometimes not even that. Plus, I knew it would end, so I'm not looking for a release off post, when all I wanted was to get out of a recruiting in New Jersey anyway. One house that was available was right next to another guy I worked with. No prob, I liked the guy. He was cool, and he wanted out of recruiting duty when his time was up too. The other was a block away. We looked at that one first. An older lady that worked with my wife had told her that she actually lived in that house on post before her husband passed. She had told her that even when they lived there, the house was creepy and had a bad spirit in it. Me? Whatever. Each house was the same. I felt that until we inspected it. My wife isn't someone that gives in to superstition easily, but as soon as we entered the place, it felt off. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like nothing was level. Everything in our perception was off, like a funhouse. Plus, I seriously had feelings of anger and rage with no provocation when we were in the place. I remember that because it was out of the blue. I was cool when we walked up to the place, but once inside, I instantly hated everyone, and I felt like I was 2 seconds from going berserk. My wife also felt uncomfortable in the place. It made her feel angry for no reason. We both decided nope. We opted to move into the second choice. It was next door to the other guy I said I worked with, but what the fuck? Liked this guy, and his, at the time, toddler daughter was a sweet kid, so no harm. We never found out why that house made us feel that way, but my wife will not deny that it wasn't us. There was something there, and she is not the person who will believe in ghosts and goblins easily. The lady she worked with wouldn't give details either, and she clearly didn't want to talk about it beyond what she had told my wife. I still wonder. What was it? It was nearing Halloween, and they had an old town Alexandria ghost tour. My wife had to work, but she told me to go on the tour if I wanted to, by myself. It was going to be cold that night, but my wife had given me a warm overcoat that came down just behind my knees. Sort of important for later. It went just like you'd expect. The tour guide lady in old-timey clothes led the group around, maybe a dozen or so people, to different places in the city and told us stories about X died here in a duel and people hear or see his ghost at times. You know, that kind of thing. The tour ended at some church that George Washington prayed at or something. I can't remember which church. It was over 20 years ago, but I looked up historic churches before typing this, so it may have been Christ's Church in Alexandria. Don't hold me to that though. Anyway, the church was obviously closed, but the grounds weren't. We stopped on that side of the church by a door as the tour guide lady told us some spooky story. She was in front of the door. We all stood on a brick walkway as she spoke, facing her. There was maybe about 10 feet of space from the church to a brick wall, and there were a few grave markers in the grassy area before the brick wall. There was no one to my left. As the lady spoke, I heard a heavy sigh directly behind me. I turned. No one was behind me. Just a few grave markers and a wall. I looked to my right, and there was a guy on the tour, listening intently to the tour lady. I figured it was my imagination, but then a few seconds later I heard it again, and it seemed even louder, like someone was doing it on purpose to get me to look. Again, I looked behind me. Again, nothing. I looked at the guy to my right and asked, "Did you hear that?" He looked at me, a bit annoyed, and said, "Hear what?" I was certain I heard a heavy sigh. This guy was the only person close enough to me to have heard it, and he said he didn't. I know he wasn't the source of the sound. Then the lady finished her story and told us we were free to explore the cemetery behind the church. The crowd dispersed into it. I was wandering by myself when I saw two women by a tombstone. It was one of those tabletop kinds. I don't know if they have a special name or anything. This tombstone was about 10 feet from the wall of the cemetery. People had been putting pieces of Halloween candy on it. So I walked over and asked the women why people put candy on this particular grave. They said they didn't know and walked off before I could ask whose grave it was. But I was curious, so I took out my lighter and tried to read the name on the stone. I figured I could look it up later. I couldn't make out the name, as the stone was really worn and my lighter didn't give me a lot of light. Then I heard it. A heavy sigh, followed by breathing, as if someone was trying to catch their breath after exerting themselves. I spun around. No one. No one was even remotely close to me. No one was within at least 30 feet of me. I said out loud, "Okay, who is doing that?" Even as I spoke, I kept thinking, this has got to be my imagination. Another heavy sigh and breathing. This time I know I heard it. Right behind me. And of course, no one was even close by. And that's when all of my army training boiled down to the 2-mile PT run. I took off. I bolted. No thoughts required. I booked on out of there at top speed, and I kept on running until I got a few blocks away to my car and went home. I was unnerved even when I got home. My wife and a friend were watching TV at the time, and I told them what happened. They both laughed, and maybe only believed that I heard something that sounded like what I thought it was. I said, "Fine, let's all go and I'll show you the place." They made no secret that they were in the nope because you may be right category and chickened out of it. Where does my long overcoat come in? The friend asked, "Did you really run all the way back to the car non-stop?" I told her, You see how long this coat is? I was going so fast it looked like a cape and people thought I must be Batman. Okay, not the greatest joke in the world, but it made my wife and friend laugh. I never did go back to that cemetery. Kinda wish I had. I still want to know why the candy and whose grave it was. So I have a friend from my city I used to live in Kentucky. Me and my two sisters and parents moved to Reno, Nevada, where we now live. My friend was visiting her dad in Reno, so she stopped by our house for a sleepover because she wanted to have a sleepover, I guess. I don't know, she kind of just showed up. Anyway, she loves paranormal stuff, and she wanted to summon a ghost for some reason. I'm a dumb kid, so I played along, and we made a house-made Ouija board. We started asking it the usual questions, blah blah blah, and what we got was a little 7-year-old girl who was murdered by her dad with an axe, because her dad drank a lot of beer, she said, and she gave the date in which she thinks she was born, and when she thinks she died. She also gave us her name, so I went up to the computer and looked up the police records for murders, and there was someone who was axe murdered by her father and was 9, not 7. All the other dates, names, birth dates, etc. were exactly the same. So either the ghost said the death date's wrong, or it's not the same person. Anyway, now we summoned this ghost, and she didn't leave, by the way. I hear small footsteps in the hallway beside my bedroom for a time every day. And whenever we eat a meal, I'll hear a very faint, "I'm so hungry," from the hallway. She's not a creepy ghost, though. She doesn't say much, but whenever she wants to go in one of our rooms, she will knock. Like I'll hear a tapping on the door, and all I do in there is play video games, so I'll just say, "Come in." And I'll hear faint footsteps on my carpet, and then hear faint footsteps out of the room. Other than that, she doesn't do anything. She just likes to hang out in the hallway, I guess. So I had a best friend around the time of my early 20s. My friend and her mother moved into an apartment in a nearby town. Around 1 or 2 months after their move-in, I was walking in the kitchen heading for the door. Out of my peripheral vision, I saw a figure of sorts, small and low to the ground, quickly pass by me. My first reaction was of it being their pet dog, a small dog, so out loud I called its name. I turned around to the direction I thought it had in, and the dog was nowhere to be heard or seen. I believe I turned around way too quickly for the dog to have run out of sight. I'm not sure if that relates to what comes next, but it's of note. About a month later, month 3 post-move-in, my friend started telling me she would hear or see shadows in her apartment. I thought maybe my ghost dog story got her imagination going, but I did believe her as she was never one to talk about paranormal stuff. She was a bit freaked out. Shortly after, my friend started telling me her experiences. I was over their apartment and sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for my friend to be done with her shower. Her mother was home and sat down across the table from me. Her and I got along and all, but never really sat down to chat kind of relationship. So it caught me a little off guard that she sat to talk with me. She starts by saying she wants to tell me something in confidence, as her daughter's good friend. Okay. She begins by telling me how my friend was also telling her mom about these experiences she'd have. Her mom admitted she pretty much brushed it off as being nothing, but noticed it was bothering her daughter. Then she went to the post office and went inside for service. Just like the movies, the small town clerk says something like, "Oh, you just moved here? Did you hear what happened where you lived?" That kind of movie line, really. Apparently, a middle-aged male was arrested for child molestation charges. On the court date for his arraignment, he shot and killed himself at the house. The mom was now beside herself and afraid to tell her daughter. Not even a month later, they had packed up and moved out. I'll never forget it. I was about 12 years old, doing my school homework on my family's dining room table. This was my usual homework spot, a big wooden dining table set up, a couple windows, chandelier above, and a few pieces of art on the walls. One of which was a framed painting, hung on the wall by your usual nail and hanger. It was a painting of a young girl in a field of flowers. Didn't we all have one? Directly below this wall art, placed against the wall, we had a wooden side table where my mom displayed her nice glassware on the top of. At this time, both my parents were downstairs, but in separate rooms. Just myself sitting at the dining room table, doing my homework. Scene set. As I always have, I decided to daydream rather than focus on my schoolwork. I don't recall what was running through my mind at the time, but I do know I became transfixed on the aforementioned painting. I don't remember feeling called to focus on it. I wish I remembered that part. So I'm starting off directing my focus solely on this painting. I don't think it was long after that the top of the framing began to tilt off the wall and forward. The bottom of the frame stayed against the wall. It was only the top tilting. To be clear, the bottom of the frame wasn't supported by anything. There were inches of wall space between the bottom of the painting and the glassware of the table. After a second of what I now know to call what the fuck, I quickly stood up off my chair, as my initial reaction was to stop the painting from falling, probably thinking I'd somehow get in trouble. Now this is one of those 5 seconds feels like 5 minutes moments. Once I stood up off the chair, I can still remember my left hand grasping the back chair post and not letting go. I was frozen in place. My initial intent of rushing toward the painting immediately ceased, from what was probably shock of what I was seeing. I was so stunned that this picture I was staring at started to tilt forward and off the wall before my eyes. All I could do was watch. The painting fell face down, and again it fell in a tilting fashion. The top of the frame tilted forward close to 90 degrees, as the bottom of the frame remained against the wall without any support to keep it in place, and from falling straight down. The painting hit the glassware and the frame shattered. I can't remember if any of the glassware broke, but there was a loud crash and a mess. My mom came to the entry of the dining room and locked eyes with me as I still stood there, left hand grasping the chair. I explained to both of them what had happened, and I do remember they didn't get mad or punish me, but I didn't get the feeling they believed me. I will still mention it in conversation with them on a rare occasion, and I still get the feeling they think I'm exaggerating or not recalling correctly. But I will never forget that moment, as it was the first real, unexplained, and what I considered paranormal experience. Has anyone had a similar experience? Does anyone have an explanation to make sense of the physics of how the painting fell? I was 14 at the time. I had just moved downstairs because I wanted more privacy, as my parents were always checking in on me. I've always been a rebellious kid and wanted to be alone and do my own thing without anyone telling me not to. I had always noticed strange things happening around my house, and I kept asking my parents if they were going through my stuff in my room. They would always say no, so I just brushed it off. These things still happen to me to this day, like things being moved and waking up in a cold sweat with no explanation. One night, as I was on my phone, I felt this feeling of dread and anxiety come upon me. I then heard a voice say, "It's okay." And I looked up and a black silhouette of a woman was standing at the foot of my bed. She had no face, but I could clearly see the outline of a petite woman just standing there. I remember feeling very scared, but also very calm at the same time. I was looking at her for 15 seconds before she vanished. I told my parents what happened, and they were also scared because my dad would always say he felt a presence in the house. I instantly moved back up to the main floor. I remember telling people about it, and I would always remind them that my parents built the house, so there were no previous owners. People have given the idea that it was my grandma who passed away a year before this happened. I still question if this is true. I haven't had anything that intense happen to me again. I'm 15 now. I still have nightmares and also question what she meant. Why was it okay? I remember telling that to myself over and over. I'm thinking of moving back down soon, but for now, I'm good right back upstairs. In the 90s, my parents were renting a Victorian house in the countryside. It was fairly isolated, and that there were no shops or towns within a 25-minute walk. But not too far from a motorway, there was a little over an hour's drive to London. One weekend, my mum was gone to see her friends, and my dad was home alone. He recalls that nothing strange happened on the first Friday or Saturday, other than he got some time to himself and spent a lot of time cycling and messing around with his bike. On the Sunday, throughout the day, he said he felt a bit weird when he was on the property, as if something were watching him. He went about his day fairly normally though. In the evening, however, it felt extremely off to him. When he was making dinner, the gas stove kept turning off automatically, and at one point, he heard a crashing outside to find his bike knocked over in the shed. Nothing was too out of the ordinary, but it felt weird. When he was eating dinner, spaghetti bolognese if I'm not mistaken, the electricity in the house failed, and my dad reported that there was a sudden coldness in the room, which is strange because it was the middle of summer. The fuse box just blew and he quickly fixed it. After dinner, he went straight to bed, hiding under the covers reportedly. While in bed, the electricity went again, but he decided against leaving bed to fix it. It was at this point he heard the sound of a flute coming from the fireplace in the bedroom. He recalls to me whenever he tells me this story that he's 100% certain someone was playing a flute in the bedroom from the fireplace. He recalls the flute suddenly halting and hearing footsteps approach the bed. At this point, he had had enough, so went to fix the fuse. He notes not seeing anything strange, but that the house was very cold. When he flipped the fuse, the lights didn't turn on, and remembers looking towards the neighbour's house and seeing their lights still on. At this point, he went straight to the bedroom and slept like a log. This is the weird part. Apparently, after experiencing this, he reported it to the landlord, and the landlord told my dad one of the old tenants was an Irish music student who killed herself in that very bedroom about 20 years previous. When my dad mentioned the date, it matched up to the date she killed herself on. I'm not a superstitious or religious person, and neither is my dad. But that story is the only thing that sways my opinion slightly. I'm going to try and find the address to the house for my dad and see if I can find the ghosts someday.